Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Have you ever really thought about how something as everyday as choosing organic at the grocery store could actually play a role in this huge thing, global food security?
It's a pretty fascinating link, right?
Totally. And that's exactly what we're digging into today with, get this, excerpts from the Wikipedia article on organic farming, a related piece on, you guessed it, biodiversity, and a whole bunch of research articles from agriculture and food security.
Should be interesting. I'm really curious to see what those research articles say,
Yeah.
beyond the whole organic versus conventional
Oh,
thing.
absolutely. But before we go there, let's make sure we're all starting on the same page. Yeah. So we're talking organic farming, but really basic. What are the core principles here?
Well, the Wikipedia article sums it up pretty well, actually. It's all about natural inputs. So think natural fertilizers instead of the synthetic stuff, relying on things like crop rotation and beneficial insects to manage pests instead of automatically reaching for the chemicals. It's about working with nature systems, not fighting against them.
Yeah, that whole working with nature idea is what always gets me. It's like instead of forcing things into these perfect rows and battling everything nature throws at them, organic farmers are trying to find ways to team up with the environment. But what does that actually look like on a real farm?
That's where agroecology comes in. The Wikipedia article mentions it, but basically it's looking at the ecological processes within agricultural systems, like understanding how everything interacts, the soil, the plants, the bugs, even the climate, everything.
Oh, I see. So it's like zooming in on that web of life beneath our feet and figuring out how it all connects on a farm.
Exactly. And that's what organic farming tries to tap into, that intricate web. Take integrated pest management, for example, or IPM. You'll even see some conventional farms using this. Instead of just defaulting to pesticides, they're like, okay, what if we introduce some beneficial insects that'll naturally keep those pest populations down? It's mimicking what happens in a balanced ecosystem.
Wow, that's a really clear example of this whole agroecology thing in action. I can already see how this approach could have way bigger implications.
Oh, for sure. Because when you understand all those connections and you work with them, you're not just like growing food, you're cultivating this whole system that's way more resilient in the long run.
Okay, I'm sold. So it's not just about a set of practices, it's like a whole different way of thinking about how we produce food.
Hmm.
But the million-dollar question is, can an approach like this, organic farming, actually feed the world?
Now, that is the question, isn't it? And thankfully, we've got all those research articles to give us some answers.
Okay, then let's jump into it. Okay, so we've established this idea of organic farming as working with nature, but I keep coming back to that question from the Wikipedia article. Can it actually produce enough food? I mean, can it really feed a growing global population? What's it take from those agriculture and food security articles?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question right there. And like a lot of complex issues, it's not a simple yes or no. The research kind of highlights both the exciting potential and some serious challenges. Like the Wikipedia article mentioned that 2012 Oxford study, remember? The one that found organic farming can sometimes need more land to get the same yields as conventional methods.
Right, that makes sense. If you're not using those supercharged synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, it probably takes a little more space to grow the same amount of food, yeah.
That's one way to think about it. But here's where things get, I think, really interesting. This study also points out that organic farming is not standing still. It's not like this is how we do it, end of story. New techniques and technologies are being developed all the time, specifically to increase those yields and address that whole land use issue.
Oh, okay, so it's not just this fixed system. Organic farming is evolving, trying to find solutions as it goes.
Exactly. Think of it like, okay, imagine you're planting a garden. You wouldn't just like scatter seeds everywhere and hope for the best, right? To get the most out of your garden, you'd plan it out, choose the best plants for your climate, make sure the soil is healthy. You might even do that companion planting thing to keep pests away naturally. Organic farming is kind of similar. It's about optimizing that whole system to make it as productive as possible.
Okay, that's a really helpful comparison. It's not just about slapping an organic label on something and calling it a day. There's actual science behind it, and it's always innovating.
100%. And a big part of that innovation focuses on something we've just touched on, biodiversity. And this is where that Wikipedia article on organic farming and biodiversity really comes in handy, I think. Remember that stat about organic farms supporting up to 30% more species?
Oh, yeah. That one was crazy. It's like you can almost picture it, all those birds singing, the whole ecosystem just buzzing with life compared to a conventional farm. But how does having all that biodiversity actually translate into better food production?
That's the key question. It's not just about creating a prettier landscape or anything. That super active ecosystem we're picturing is actually doing a ton of important work. More beneficial insects mean natural pest control works better, right? And that means you need fewer pesticides, even on an organic farm. And then there's the soil. When the soil is healthier, with more microorganisms and organic matter, you get stronger, more resilient crops that can handle things like drought or disease.
So it's like organic farming kind of creates this perfect little cycle where a thriving ecosystem actually leads to more productive farms.
Exactly. And it's not just like a nice idea.
Yeah.
The research backs it up. Remember that 21-year study comparing organic and unorganic soil?
Hmm.
The difference in yield, particularly over the long term, is huge.
Wow, that is a seriously strong argument for biodiversity. But okay, let's bring this all back to our main topic. Global food security. We've seen how organic farming can create these awesome, biodiverse, and resilient ecosystems. But how does that help feed a global population that just keeps growing? Where do all those research articles from agriculture and food security come in?
And that takes us right to the good stuff.
Mhm.
Because that journal, it goes way beyond this simple organic versus conventional debate. It brings us into the real world, into those complex realities of the global food system. You'll find research on everything, like seriously, everything, from the impacts of climate change on small farms in Africa to like the role of urban gardening in cities and how that helps with food security. It's a global perspective on an issue with so many layers.
And it reminds us that food security isn't just about the total amount of food we're producing around the world, right? It's also about who has access to that food, who's controlling the resources, and how things like global events can really mess with those systems.
Absolutely. And what I find super interesting is how many of these research articles really emphasize the social and economic parts of food security. There's one, for example, that studied how empowering women in agriculture, specifically in Ethiopia, can really have a big impact on food security for whole communities.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading that one. It found that when women have more control over resources and decision-making in agriculture, it really improves things for everyone.
Exactly. It just shows you we can't just focus on the technical stuff, the farming techniques.
Hmm.
We also have to address the social, economic, and even political stuff that affects who gets access to healthy food.
It's about empowering people, not just, getting higher crop yields.
Couldn't agree more. And that's where you get into this idea of food sovereignty,
Yeah.
the right of people to define their own food systems.
So it's about moving away from this top-down approach, where someone else decides what people eat, and instead empowering communities to take charge of their own food.
Exactly. And that usually means shifting toward farming practices that are more localized, more sustainable, and more in line with those agroecological principles, kind of like a lot of the things we see in organic agriculture.
Whoa, it's like we've come full circle. We started by talking about the science behind organic farming, and now we're seeing how those ideas connect to bigger social and economic movements that are fighting for a more fair and sustainable food system. It's amazing how, zoomed out we've gotten, right? We started with the tiniest organisms in the soil, and now we're talking about these huge global movements for change.
It shows you just how much more there is to food than just what's on your plate. It's connected to culture, to the economy, even to politics. It's really complex.
Totally. And like those agriculture and food security articles showed us, there's no one magic solution, no easy answer to making our food system more fair and sustainable. But it does feel like organic farming, with that focus on working with nature and empowering communities, that could be a big part of the answer.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really cool is that it's not just talk. Researchers are actually figuring out how to take those ecological benefits of organic farming and make them work on a larger scale so it can work for more farmers all over the world.
Yeah, that makes me think about all the really innovative stuff we're seeing now, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, even agroecology like we've been talking about. They're all taking those basic ideas of working with nature and running with it.
Exactly. And a lot of those ideas, they're especially well suited for farmers in developing countries.
Hmm.
The ones who often can't afford all those expensive chemicals and who are dealing with climate change already.
It's like we're seeing a total change in how we think about food and farming. We're moving away from that old industrialized system, the one that's all about doing the same thing everywhere, and moving towards something that's more diverse, more resilient, more, in tune with how nature works.
Totally. And it's being driven by both sides, the scientists doing the research and the everyday people making different choices.
Mm.
Consumers care more about where their food comes from, so they're looking for better options. And farmers, they're tired of the old ways that are hurting their land and their livelihoods.
It really feels like there's this, like, energy building behind this new way of doing things. It's pretty inspiring, honestly.
Oh, definitely. And it's even more hopeful when you see that it's not just about individuals making different choices. Governments